Hello, I'm Daniel Meyer, Artistic Director of the Westmoreland Symphony Orchestra, and we have had a wonderful opportunity over the past summer to get to know some of our own musicians of the orchestra. And now that we're coming very close to the beginning of our brand new season with the Westmoreland Symphony, I wanted to take this opportunity to introduce you to our first soloist. And she is none other than the principal flute of the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra, and her name is Lorna McGhee, and it is a great honor and a pleasure to have her here today. Lorna, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Daniel. Thank you for having me on this series. I'm so excited to be playing with the orchestra.
Well, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about October 24th and the fact that we're going to be together on the stage and making music. Of course, the orchestra is playing some music of George Walker, his beautiful lyric for strings, the Holberg Suite of Grieg, and this incredible concerto by C.P.E. Bach. But before we get to the music, I just wanted to do a little introductory material on you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, and then ultimately how you came to be a member of the Pittsburgh Symphony?
Yes, well, your audience will probably not be able to detect the Scottish accent because it's pretty diluted by now. But I grew up on the west coast of Scotland. When I go home now, they think I sound American.
Yeah.
But I grew up in a small town called Largs in Ayrshire on the west coast, and was tremendously lucky to uh, be the beneficiary of playing in youth orchestras. I also got a place at the junior department of the Royal Scottish Academy of Music. So all my Saturdays growing up from the age of 11 to 17, all my Saturdays were spent at the music school in Glasgow. And
So how
that's,
much of a commute was that, Lorna? Was that, how
oh,
long did it take you?
just an hour on the train.
Okay.
Not nothing too dramatic. But that's where I met David Nicholson, who was the principal flute of the Scottish Chamber Orchestra. He was my teacher there, and he, I think we all owe a great debt to our teachers. The people in our lives that have sparked the enthusiasm and just their joy in what they do is sort of contagious. So I just lived from my lessons with David Nicholson on Saturdays. And how fortunate to come from a small town in Scotland and be plugged into this lineage. He was taught by Jean-Pierre Rampal and Geoffrey Gilbert, who is not such a famous name, but Geoffrey Gilbert taught James Galway, William Bennett. So I was very, very lucky to tap into that kind of lineage. And then I went to the Royal Academy in London when I was 17 to go and study with the legendary William Bennett, who to this day is one of the greatest musicians on the planet, in my opinion. And that was really inspiring. Then I got a job with the BBC Symphony Orchestra, and then I met my husband, who's in the kitchen right now. You might hear him putting the microwave on. Um, I met David at a chamber music festival in Scotland, and he was working in North America. He's Canadian, so this is the long part of the story, but I'll cut it short. So I left the BBC and moved to North America, first of all to teach at the University of Michigan, and then to go to Vancouver, where we both taught at the University of British Columbia. And I did a lot of chamber music and a lot of flute and harp music and a lot of guest principal work in various orchestras. I would go back to Britain quite often to do that. And then, fortunately for both of us, there were jobs in Pittsburgh for our instruments. It's almost unheard of for musicians to get jobs in the same city. That's one of the great drawbacks of being a musician. So we were very fortunate. I got the job as principal flute with the Pittsburgh Symphony, and David, my husband, David Harding, got the job of professor of viola and chamber music at Carnegie Mellon. So we've been here now for 8 years. So
Wonderful. Yeah, and we're all the richer for it to have you both in the community. And
thank
let
you.
me retrace just a little bit when you talked about William Bennett and your studies in London. Um, what did he impart to you that you make use of today? Maybe not only in your own playing, but the way that you teach other students. What was kind of his area of focus? Would he talk technique most of the time, or would he talk about phrasing, or would it be a combination of things? What made him such a unique or such a special
Well,
teacher?
he and his wife were an amazing team because for the first year I was at college, I studied with his wife, Michi Bennett, and that was pure technique. The whole year I was not allowed to play any pieces, and I was such a keener that I just did it. don't
Yeah.
think I would
Yeah.
necessarily ask any of my students to do that now, but I was just such a keener that I would just do whatever it took. And so that was tremendous to have that technical underpinning. And then for the next 3 years, my lessons with him were all about the music and especially about tone and tone colors and bringing the music alive. So that was always that was always the mandate, that the music has to be alive and it has to be communicative, not just correct, or not just with a good tone, but with a tone that is expressive and communicative. So a huge amount of our work was on tone colors and uh, just finding ways to bring that spark of life into the sound. One of his phrases was the sound must always be smiling.
Hmm.
And then, so I would say, one of the greatest things I learned from him was just taking such delight in the music, um, finding the essence of what you're trying to do, not just executing something, but to sort of almost recreate it, in partnership with the composer, who may have been dead for several hundred years, but somehow to breathe life into it in that moment, to recreate it. So that's always been my sort of yardstick, my guiding light. I also love the fearlessness of the way he plays, and I tell my students, when William Bennett plays, there's no hedging his bets. It's either the air goes this way or it goes that way. And when he goes that way, it's so fully committed, to the storytelling. That
Would he sing in lessons, or demonstrate for you, or would he coax you through just coming up with some mental images, or what sorts of tools would he use to actually get you and his other students to get after the essence of the music?
Well, so I think we learn by so many different means. Uh, so I think one of the greatest things of studying with him was just actually being in the presence of that sound. I remember the very first lesson I had with him. I'd listened to recordings, but being in the same room, it was like this tsunami of gorgeous tone that just kind of washed over you. I could not believe the beauty of that sound. So just first of all, having that in your ear. Um, and he comes from a tradition from Marcel Moyes, the French tradition, which was very much inspired by vocal technique and listening to great singers and trying to make the flute sing. So listening to great singers, listening to great string players, what do they do with the vibrato? How do they get more excitement in the tone? How do they resolve phrase endings? Using the vibrato skillfully. So I mean, there was quite a lot of technique involved in it, of course, but I would say he has a tremendous imagination, and so
Yeah.
he would often make up words to go with the melody, so that you were sort of getting out of yourself and getting more into the storyline, and also just thinking about the inflection of words and inflection of a sentence. So it's not instrumental; it's like you were really talking or singing through your instrument. So I think those were the primary ways that he would convey, you know.
That's fantastic. And now with a piece like the CPE Bach, I mean, obviously these are all decisions that you have to make in preparing yourself to play the piece. Um, have you? Of course, there's a lot of talk now about this idea of period performance practice, and this idea, particularly in string playing, we talk a lot about whether you use vibrato or not vibrato, and of course the bows were shaped differently, the instruments were strung with different types of strings. Um, do you apply any of that knowledge to the way that you might approach something like this particular piece? Obviously, you're going to be playing an instrument that would be different from the one that would have been played in Bach's day. Can you talk a little bit about those issues?
Yes, well, I have to say, I love the whole early music movement. I have a Baroque flute myself, and I've
Mhm.
studied it, and that has been a tremendous source of inspiration to me. And I, I love the Baroque flute. It's sort of, I call it, it's like a cooing wood dove. It's such a gentle sound. You have to sort of release the air in a different way to make the instrument resonate. So you can't sort of sustain or barrel through the way you would on a modern flute. So I would say that way of releasing the sound is definitely part of the way I would approach this. But however, when you're playing with a modern orchestra, and you really need to project.
Right.
And a lot of this, especially in the first movement, is in the low register. So um, unless I were playing with a tiny string section, you know, I, I it's not going to be that informed by the early music style. I won't go whole hog
Right.
into that way of doing it. But taking some of the beautiful elements of sort of releasing the sound sometimes rather than sustaining, or
Yeah.
especially the phrase endings. That there's elegance in that. Like you wouldn't play it the same way you'd play Nielsen, for example.
Exactly.
So you
Yeah.
you you try and get, and the other thing I want to try and capture is the spirit. In those days, in the court of Frederick the Great. So this piece, Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach was employed by Frederick the Great in his court, and Frederick the Great was a flute player, and Quantz was his teacher.
Mhm.
Probably this was written for Quantz. I'm not sure Frederick the Great could have played it, but all power to him if he could have.
Right, exactly. He must have been quite a virtuoso if he actually could pull it off.
So some of the things I want to bring to it, which are in the spirit of the age, are this sense of rhetoric. So in the court of Frederick the Great, he was very interested in philosophy, and one of the great qualities that they revered in those days was being able to build an argument and being able to back up your argument and
Right.
be articulate and eloquent in the way you presented it. So in the way the phrases are built up in this piece, trying to find that very human connection of sort of building your argument in a logical way and having the sense of dialogue and these answering phrases. So sort of bringing that to the table, and also in that era, um, it's a little bit later than Johann Sebastian Bach, so the music is much less contrapuntal. So for example, it's more transparent. It's a little bit more melody and harmony rather than melody and then counter melodies and all the intertwining. There's still a little bit of that, but it's a little bit more transparent. And so there's two things that I want to bring to the table with it that are particular to this era. One is the Empfindsamkeit, which means sensitive style, which is the music of this time was really sort of wearing your heart on your sleeve. Like there was the affect. What is the affect of this movement? So, for example, the slow movement is very, very singing,
Yeah.
very sort of right from the heart. So it's slightly, wearing your heart on your sleeve. There's no doubt about it. Now it's singing. Now it's a little bit full of angst. So the emotions are very overt.
Right.
So I want to bring that to it. And then the other stylistic thing is the Sturm und Drang, the storm and stress, which is so appropriate for this piece.
Yeah.
That captured people's imaginations in the day of Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, and he was really, I think, brilliant at this. And if you listen to some of his string symphonies, I'm not sure how familiar the audience is with Carl from Philipp Emanuel. He's in his day, he was much more famous than his dad. He was a bit of a rock star, and actually, I think he's, in our time, he's been overshadowed. And I think I would encourage people to listen to some of his symphonies, some of his string symphonies, because they also embody this storm and stress. And so it's such exciting music. So, for example, the last movement, it's like a lightning storm. It's like bolts of lightning coming down, and it's the total epitome of storm and stress.
Yeah.
So it's very, very exciting and turbulent in that way. And the first movement is quite stern. So I love to play around with these two ideas of the sensitive style and then the storm and stress. And so we'll bring that
Right.
to.
And then add to that just the sheer virtuosity, as you alluded to. This is a piece that not every flute player would have been able to play in the day. So it was very clearly styled for somebody who had incredible facility. So on top of that facility, then you have to have this amazing musicianship of being able to project the storm and the stress and the Empfindsamkeit of the whole.
That's right, musical stress rather than personal stress.
Right. Exactly. Well, Lorna, we are absolutely thrilled to get a chance to work with you. We're really looking forward to this collaboration. And as you know, this is our season opener with the Westmoreland Symphony. And while we can't have an audience in the Palace Theater with us, we will have many people listening and watching virtually from their own homes, from the comfort of their own homes. But believe me, we will be thinking of our audience. We will be uh, we'll have you in our minds at every moment that we're performing, and we're just thrilled to be able to collaborate with you. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to talk to us a little bit about yourself and about the concerto. And we cannot wait till October 24th.
Thank you. I can't wait either. Thanks so much.
What